Western civilization. How much do you know? What happens when historians need to prove Indigenous land rights in court? How do you reconstruct the culture's past when written records are produced by outsiders? I'm Russell Miles, and this is the 50th episode of our Western Civilization series. To gauge how well this is achieved, we'll examine how effective basic demographic information is presented, specifically the pre-Columbian population of the Americas. This is one of the great historical debates, which we explored in episode 15 regarding non-European societies' responses to disease. When we ask how many people lived in the Americas, we're not just asking a number, we're asking what counts as evidence, whose methods matter, what do different cultures even mean by population. Ethnohistory promises answers, but the story is messier than that. Join us as we unpack the earliest attempts to answer these questions, the revisions that followed, and why scholars still can't agree today. These historical questions directly influence contemporary policy on four critical fronts: First Nation peoples' autonomy and self-governance, resource extraction and environmental protection, addressing the persistent health and educational disparities, the repatriation and protection of cultural artefacts and human remains. The American Society of Ethnohistory asserts that its mission is to create a more inclusive picture of the history of native groups in the Americas. The Society's journal includes topics on South America, Mesoamerica, Africa, Polynesia, and Asia. That is, the impact of the era of Western exploration and conquest, with contact with unknown cultures and societies. The focus of ethnohistory has mostly been the study of Indigenous people to describe their cultures before contact with Western civilization. Raymond Wood offers that this discipline reconstructs past lifeways and an understanding of cultural processes. The discipline emerged from a court case between the Santa Fe Railway and Huapai people over land rights in 1943 and the subsequent establishment of the United States Indian Land Commission. The assessment of land rights required evidence and expert knowledge, so formulating a new scholarly discipline entailing the use of historical and ethnological methods and materials to gain knowledge about nature and the causes in a culture. Land disposition runs through Indigenous history like a thread of grief. The British expelled the Arcades from the Maritime Territories in what is now Canada. In Tasmania, survivors of the Black Wars 1820 to 1832 were imprisoned on Flinders Islands where they died. And the Cherokees, with their sedentary farms and functional governments. Their land was seized in the 1830s in a catastrophe known as the Trail of Tears, where the Five Nations were forced west of the Mississippi. Kelly Caves describes how in 1961, Nancy Ostrich-Lurich, a PhD candidate, replied positively to the question whether it would be possible to do an ethnological study of Paris during the French Revolution. She received a retort from her professors that such a study would merely be history. Richard Dawson, cited by Kelly Caves, suggested that ethnological approach be applied to the folklore of national enclaves such as blacks, Poles, Italians, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, and similar groups living in the United States. Zurhad Drupp, writing from a British Commonwealth perspective in 2017, turned to ethnography to make sense of all this. He quotes the anthropologist Francis Boas, who lived from 1858 to 1942, whose definition was the history of mankind in all its varieties, linguistics applied to people without written language, the ethnology of people without historical records, and the prehistorical archaeology. In other words, it is how we understand human societies where traditional historical sources don't exist. Ethnohistorians are defined by how they work. They draw from maps, music, painting, photographs, folklore, oral tradition, archaeological sites, museum collections, customs, language, place names. But the real power comes from fieldwork, anthropologists embedding themselves in Indigenous communities. They learned the language, built trust and gathered stories, foundation myths, how disputes were resolved, child rearing practices, warfare, grief, funeral rites, food preparation, technology and intertribal relationships. These methods have had to adapt, and this is where things get complicated. James Axwell, writing in 1979, identified the core problem. Often the descendants of their historical subjects no longer survive, or if they do, have lost much of their historical cultural character. His conclusion: the anthropologist has to rely on documents just as a historian does. And here's what that means in practice. You're working from European records, explorer logs, missionary diaries, trader accounts, military reports, adding land allocation laws, court records, taxation documents and tribute records. You're trying to reconstruct an Indigenous life through the paperwork of the people who colonised them. Our next podcast will look at the estimated population of the Americas and how this has been revised over time. In the meantime, estimates by contemporary scholars are the population was A. 6 million, B. 8 million, C. 24 million, D. 50 million. If you like this channel, please subscribe and tick like. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I can be contacted at email russmills@iprimus.com.au. Thanks for listening.